Душе моя Господа, благословен еси Господи. Благослови, душе моя Господа, и вся внутренняя моя, имя святое Его.
Prayers of our Holy Fathers, the Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us. My dearest brothers and sisters, my dear fathers, Father Deacon put that I was one of the youngest deacons today. Today at breakfast, he said I was the one with the least amount of life experience. That isn't true. That is, in fact, the case. As a therapist, though, and I think the reason why I was asked to be here is that as a therapist, I see the best sides of the clergy in my clients, and I see the worst sides of the clergy with my clients. In many ways, I see the way the love of God can flow through the cleric and influence and heal those that I work with. And I can also see the psychopathologies that have been developed because of a bad conversation with a priest or deacon. Today, I'd like to talk about some of those insights that I've seen. I think in order to talk about charity within a diaconate, we must start at the beginning. And so let's turn to Acts 6. I say turn, I mean I'll read it, but we'll say, now in these days, when the disciples were increasing in number, the Hellenists murmured against the Hebrews because their widows were neglected in the daily distribution. And the 12 summoned the body of the disciples and said, it is not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to serve at table. Therefore, brethren, pick out from among you 7 men of good reputation, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we may appoint to this duty. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and the ministry of the word. And with that, they said, and what they said pleased the whole multitude, and they chose Stephen, a man full of faith in the Holy Spirit, and Philip, and Proctorus, and Nicanor, and Timon, and Nicholas, a convert of Antioch. These they set before the apostles, and they prayed and laid hands on them, and the word of God increased, and the number of the disciples multiplied greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests were obedient to the faith. Now, as was pointed out on Thursday evening, it would be a mistake to say that the diaconate was simply fulfilling a practical purpose of feeding the widows, because the next chapter goes straight into the preaching of Stephen. Stephen was immediately driven to go and preach. He was not driven to feed the widows only. My brothers, there is no question that the world is in desperate need of being fed. From my perspective, I see anxiety rates are on a rise. There is perhaps no time in history when anxiety was at a greater level. Depression rates, what we call the common cold now of psychological pathology, is on a steady rise as well. Addiction, particularly the existential addiction of the opioid crisis and pornography, is on rise as well. Within the last 10 years, suicide rates, the great proclamation of meaninglessness, has increased by 25%. People are desperately hungry for existential meaning and purpose in the world, and this world does not provide it. In fact, it goes so far as to say that there is no meaning. But a person without a meaning is a person with no purpose. A person without purpose is a person in a very, very deep state of depression. Friedrich Nietzsche, you thought you wouldn't get away without a quote from Nietzsche, but Friedrich Nietzsche said, a man with a why can endure almost any what. The world is struggling to find a why. We are called to feed the hungry, and the hungry are much more than those with empty stomachs. In fact, most of us will have to find the existential hunger which the world is longing for now. But I wonder, what was that thought that was running through your head the moment the bishop's omophore was on your head? I remember mine. Mine was only 2 years ago, and I remember it very specifically. I was thinking not about feeding people, but I was thinking about how great I was looking in my vestments. I was thinking about how wonderful I was going to make that last actinia sound. I was thinking about the cassock. I was thinking about the titles that I was being given. But that's not what the people needed. That's not what my people at home want from me. I don't think I'm that unique in that need, in that mindset of looking towards all of the liturgical things as opposed to some of those more worldly things. Thankfully, I think the Lord can still use us to be able to bridge that gap between the liturgy and the daily life. He can take my desire for the liturgy and he can adapt it into a daily existence. My ruminations, I think that the diaconal ministry can be found within two of those extremes. There can be those who view ministry solely as a liturgical activity, something that is done on Sunday morning or perhaps on a feast day. And there can be the other extreme, which then says the deacon is a provider of some social justice. He is the provider which feeds the practical needs of the people. But I think this deep down is a fallacy. It is a fallacy that looks at the liturgical world as something separate from our daily lives. It looks at the daily as something set aside from the liturgical as well. As if Sunday morning, I am one deacon, and when Monday comes, I am some other person. I am still the same minister. I am still the same deacon when I go to work on Monday morning, as I was chanting that actinia the day before. The liturgy is the source, and it is the thing that gives meaning to our daily lives. But our daily lives must also influence the liturgy and our liturgical expression. In other words, we must be congruent. That's a psychological term. We must be congruent in the way in which we live our lives. The deacon cannot simply pray the liturgy as if he is someone set away from the daily needs of the community. When I preach, "In peace let us pray to the Lord," am I thinking about the daily lives of the couple behind me who is struggling in their marriage? When I pray out, "It is time for the Lord to act," Reverend Father, give the blessing, am I expressing the needs of the community to find the blessing of the Lord in their daily lives at work? But it's the other way around too. When I see a serviceman out in the world on Monday morning, am I reflecting on how that interaction will affect the next Sunday when I pray for those in service to our country? Does my daily life influence my liturgical life? And my liturgical life influence my daily life? People can pick up on incongruence. Just on Wednesday, I was in session, and I was thinking about today. I was thinking about today's talk, and I was not really listening to what my client was. I'm sure that's quite a surprise that a therapist wouldn't be listening to their client. I wasn't really listening, and my client called me out on it. He said, "You want to be somewhere else, don't you? You don't really care what I'm saying." Of course, I had to say yes, but they could pick up on it. They saw that I was not being attentive to their needs. They saw that I was not present. I wonder if that's not the case for us in liturgy sometimes too. Can the people see us as not being truly congruent and attentive to the task that we're doing, but we're thinking about the tasks to be done later that day? I'm really quite moved by the story of the saints. And the ones that always speak to me are the holy unmercenaries. I've been told once that as someone who charges insurance, I should be called a mercenary healer. But the holy unmercenaries are very interesting to me. Cosmas and Damien, they were great physicians of their time. They were specialists and knew all of the treatments that were appropriate for them to be doing. But there's something interesting about ancient medicine. It was terrible. It really didn't do much. And yet people were drawn to the faith because of their actions. What was this healing that they were providing? What was this healing that was so terrible from a medical perspective? Well, certainly they were wonder workers, and there were mystic healings that took place, and I think we can't denigrate that in any way. But I also wonder if Cosmos and Damien's healings was not because they were present to the people. They were congruent in great love for those that they came across. They were congruent in their positive regard and hope that the people that they were healing and working with would find the Lord. They had a human connection. They had an experience of the human within their mystic healings. St. Pantaleon, the great story of St. Pantaleon converting his father on his deathbed. There is nothing mystic about that conversion. It was because St. Pantaleon was emotionally connected and had a human experience with his father. He had a conversation of deep charity. In psychology, we know this as a principal foundation. We call it the great trinity of psychotherapy. Congruence, positive regard, and client-centeredness, right? But it is this motion of being connected with those that we are working with. It is this motion of having this feeling of congruence within our lives. In psychology, we know that this is what truly heals the client. All the techniques, all of those things that we spend so many hours trained in are helpful, but they are secondary to the interaction that the client has with the therapist. I think it's the same for us. We can read books on pastoral counseling. We can read books on how to preach better, and we should. But principally, and most importantly, those augment the human connection that we have as deacons to those around us. Those augment the intimate experience of one another that we have. I remember one story in particular of a woman who came to me. We'll call her Susan. The names have been changed to protect the innocent, of course, yes. But we'll call her Susan. Susan was sexually and physically abused by men throughout her entire life, starting at a very, very young age. She was brutally sexually assaulted in one situation, and she was battered throughout most of her 3 marriages. She felt completely isolated from the church and from those who she was closest to in her family. And when she finally got the pregnancy test back positive, she had a feeling of being able to turn to no one but the abortionist. After many, many, many years, I think it was 40, of being out of union with the church, after many years of wandering through the aimlessness of life, she happened to walk into a Catholic church. She saw a deacon there, and he was congruent in his experience of the liturgy. When he was preaching the gospel, she told me he was the one who actually believed what he was saying. He was the one who actually saw what she was going through and saw how the gospel would apply to her life. And so she walked up to him and asked if they could meet. Eventually, over time, this would turn into an intimate spiritual relationship. She says that relationship was the thing that saved her from suicide many times. That she could call on this deacon and experience his charity, his love. Over time, in one of the darkest moments, she finally called me at the behest of her spiritual director. She phoned me, and it was an interesting conversation where she said, my spiritual director wants me to be here because he feels that you are someone who can take me to the next step. You are someone who can bring about the next phase in my healing journey. So after 2 years of work, through the abuse and the pain that has been happening, she's now come to a state where she says she is no longer suicidal, and she is actually looking towards vocational ministry herself. It is truly a beautiful thing. It's not because of any technique that I did, but it was the Holy Spirit healing through my techniques. Throughout all of it, she's told me many times that deacon who she walked into the church and met, was the one who saved her life. I'm reminded of the story of, we'll call him John. John was a middle-aged man, had a parish who one day, his son, who was about 15, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. It was a quick diagnosis, and his son died a few months after being told by the doctor. This man refused to go back to church, and I understand why. He felt that God was punishing him for something that he didn't really understand. He felt that there, in some way, was that he could not connect with the church anymore. He said that the church really did not know what to do with him. He had a similar experience, though, of a deacon. The deacon noticed and knew the situation after the funeral. And he called John one day and said, "Can we get a cup of coffee?" Now, the deacon didn't have some kind of therapeutic experience. The deacon didn't have some kind of specialized technique, but he did know how to be a person. John and him met for coffee every week for months. And finally, John, through the experience of that intimate relationship with this deacon, he found the Lord. And he came back, reconciled to the church, and the church to him. In both of these stories, I think what we hear and what I have experienced is that the deacon was in the place of Christ. The deacon was Christ to these people. The deacon brought the charity of God to Susan and to John. They had an intimate experience with the Lord. And I think that is our call as deacons, to be that intimate experience of the Lord, inside or outside of ministry, of liturgy. Now, I am not naive enough to think that there are perhaps some impediments to that charity. I came up with 4 that I struggle with the most. I'm sure that you might have some different ones, but you probably can relate to mine. The 4 that I see is that parishioners annoy me or they anger me. I've never experienced that. Perhaps another one might be, I don't know what to say. In situations of, especially in intense drama, the question of what do I say to this person rings in my ears. There is also this question of transference. Transference is a psychological term. It means that I am struggling with the same thing that they're struggling with. And so how can I help someone if I am in their shoes as well? And the last one is what we call spiritual warfare. I'd like to go through each of these in depth and kind of talk about how I have experienced them. Though I, as Father Deacon Daniel has said, do not have the most life experience here. And perhaps you can see how it will apply differently in yours. Perhaps you can afterwards tell me how you might help in these situations. So let's start. Parishioners annoy us or parishioners anger us. Now, I don't know about you, but the time when parishioners annoy me the most is right after liturgy. I have now, hopefully, put my entire heart and soul into the liturgical activities. And they come with some issue that they want to discuss. I am hungry. I probably alluded, so I'm not in a perfect state of mind. And I am struggling to then, I see you all have experienced that too. I am struggling to have that congruence that I have. There also might be personality issues. Some people will just annoy me. It's just the reality of life. So, how have I found it to be an effective way of moving forward? Well, when I am tired, first and foremost, I must know myself. I must know what my struggles are. And so, the clergy at my parish know that nobody is going to really talk with Deacon Basil until he's gotten downstairs and gotten his food and cup of coffee. After that, I am much more disposed to have a conversation of spiritual merit. I can be congruent. It's important to know yourself in those experiences. After pre-sanctified liturgies on Holy Week, I am not in a good place to be able to have a deep spiritual conversation. I need to go home and go to bed. These are important to know ourselves in ministry. For personality issues, those who annoy us the most I think, can be the most Christ-like to us. We must see how Christ views this person and how we are viewed by them in the role of Christ. And we must pray for these people. We must pray for this person and for ourselves when they're in that state of annoyance. It's funny, after 2 years of ministry, which is not a whole long time, for the record, I understand that. After 2 years, the parishioners who annoyed me the most, I have been able to come and experience deep spiritual conversations with. And the ones who didn't bother me so much at the beginning, they're starting to get a little on my nerves. This isn't being taped, is it? Goodness. I must know that, and I must pray for that. I change, people change, and I must know that. And so we must develop and work on our personality issues and pray that the Lord will be present with us. There is this question of we don't know what to say. I think what the story of John that we talked about earlier emphasizes is that you don't need to know what to say. I spent a year as a grief counselor for a hospice. Now, there are all the techniques in the world that you can try and do psychotherapeutically as a grief counselor. But when you're in a hospice and death is intimate, it is imminent. When death is imminent, there's really not a whole lot you can say. You just have to be present. It's the relationship that heals. So, techniques are things to say, knowing exactly what is the best spiritual verse to be explaining in this situation. Those are secondary. Those are secondary to being present. Now, certain pastoral counseling or spiritual direction textbooks can be extremely helpful. They can be extremely useful in helping understand exactly how this can develop and how we can develop as better ministers. But those are secondary to the relationship that we have. Perhaps also, if we don't know what to say, it is time to direct someone to a psychotherapist or to a priest. And very, very often I get questions from deacons, where do I find a counselor? And that's catholictherapists.com. Okay, catholictherapists.com is a phenomenal resource. If you have questions about that, please feel free to email me and we can connect. There are a lot of resources that are available. So, we must know our limits. There are times when we don't know what to say. There are times where we are intimately connected with people and yet they still need more help. Susan needed more help. So that deacon connected her with me. There are questions then of transference. Parishioners deal with issues similar to our own. These are very common issues. Perhaps they're issues of alcoholism, perhaps they're issues of struggles within our marriage, perhaps there are existential issues or questions of faith. These are perhaps not unique in our own lives. Perhaps we struggle with them as well. So what do we do in these situations? Well, I think you need to make an assessment, at least I have in my life. Is this the kind of issue that we can be honest about in our lives? I wouldn't necessarily tell a parishioner if I was struggling with alcohol, but I might tell a parishioner that sometimes I struggle with my children. Sometimes I couldn't care less that my 5-year-old is wearing a unicorn horn today for her birthday. I don't feel connected to her, and I struggle with those moments sometimes. I can be honest about those needs for connection. I can also connect them with someone who can help. The other question is, do I need spiritual direction or therapy myself in these areas? If I'm unable to connect with certain parishioners because of my issues, because of my transference, then perhaps I need to seek therapy in those issues myself. The last area that I think impede charity is what we perhaps call spiritual warfare. And for me, this is dating back, and this is nothing on Deacon Dominic's comment, but for me, the demonology and the question of spiritual warfare relates back to a great hero of mine, Evagrius of Pontus. For those of you who don't know, Evagrius of Pontus was an early church father, or an early desert father, about 4th generation in the Desert Fathers. He had the problem of having to deal with monks who were coming to him as a deacon, to then develop them spiritually, help them develop spiritually. And there was not a manual of monastic life at this time. So what he did is he would take notes and he would think about what were the common struggles that monks were having. He wrote a text on it called The 8 Evil Thoughts. Now, most people are familiar with the second version of the 8 Evil Thoughts that Gregory the Great transitioned to, which was the 7 Deadly Sins. But the 8 Evil Thoughts shows us how spiritual warfare typically occurs. It typically occurs within our thoughts. This is something that was talked about yesterday. That it is through temptation and those thoughts that we have that we then lead to sin. And it is the realm of the demons which then bring us those evil thoughts. Evagrius always had a malady, one of the 8, and then he had a treatment for it as well. For me, if you want spiritual health and spiritual development, one of the fastest ways to do it is to turn to Evagrius' 8 evil thoughts and find the treatments that he has developed for each of them. I want to talk about just 2 of them, which I think is the most pronounced within ministry. And that is, first, vainglory. Now, vainglory is slightly different than pride. For Evagrius, he had the symptomatology of vainglory of wanting to make public visible acts of oneself. I'm sure you don't know any deacons that have desired that. You shouldn't look at me then. Making public and visible acts for myself. There is another symptom of relating what was done to gain the good opinion of others. Relating what was done to gain the good opinion of others. And then finally, the symptom of ingratitude. Claiming all that was done by oneself was by one's own power and one's own success. This demon is present in the world today in a variety of ways. Over time, this demon will destroy relationships. Over time, this demon will lead us either to pride, if we give into it, or if it is thwarted and we do not have vainglory, it can lead to sadness. We get messed up on either end, right? And so, it destroys our ability to relate to other people. It is the over-concern for what the cassock looks like. It is the over-concern for the vestments that I had, or how good I would make that penny sound. I was struggling with the demon of vainglory. Now, perhaps you struggle with it too, but thankfully Evagrius has treatments for it. He says that principally the problem with vainglory is that we are seeking the esteem of others instead of seeking the esteem of God. Seeking the esteem of others instead of seeking the esteem of God. Well, how do we seek the esteem of God then? Well, it is through prayer. It is through the prayer, and particularly the liturgical prayer, that we find the esteem of God in our lives. There is perhaps another treatment, though Evagrius didn't say it, St. Gregory of Sinai would later say it, that it is the Jesus prayer over and over, that constant breathing in of the Jesus prayer and breathing out of the sin. That is one of the cures. Interestingly enough, the Neptic psychotherapeutic movement is actually looking to use the Jesus prayer as a treatment for anxiety and depression. It's being researched by the Orthodox as we speak. It's very interesting. But it is a therapeutic cure for vainglory. The last one that I want to talk about is this concept of Acadia. Now, Acadia was actually a development of Evagrius. It was, originally in its ancient Greek, it was meant to be the emotional inability of someone to bury their dead father. Sounds kind of strange, right? But it is, in a spiritual sense, spiritual burnout. For Evagrius, there are 5 symptoms of Acadia. The first one is an interior instability, the inability to focus. And Evagrius has quite humorous quotes on this, where he says it is the monk who runs to the window to stare up and see if it is yet 9th hour from the sun. Just the picture of that kind of is quite humorous to me when you think about this elder monk running to the window. It's that interior instability to focus on the work that needed to be done at hand. Evagrius also says that there is a hatred for work. There is a hatred for the mundane that can be found with Acadia. Additionally, there is a hatred for one's superior, in particular one's spiritual father, where one turns to one's own successes, one's own world, to try and develop a sense of identity. There is a hatred for prayer. There is looking at your watch, waiting for the ninth hour to be over. And then finally, there is an over-concern for one's health. Now, I want to take a little moment here and explain what that means. That is, an over-concern for one's health is directly related to fasting, right? That's when it's a Friday during Lent, and I have a slight headache, right? And I'm thinking, oh, it's not that I slept funny. It's not that I'm a little dehydrated. It's that I need protein. It's not that I need to go get, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's that I need a hamburger, right? It is an over-concern for one's health. I'm really mostly speaking from my own personal experience with that one. Acadia is the demon of our age. It is the millennial, as a millennial, I think you could say, it is the millennial curse. We are unable to persevere in our ministry and our lives because we are constantly looking for something else to do. We are constantly looking for that next ministry instead of focusing in on the ones that we have been assigned. We are constantly fighting with our pastor because we want greater and greater things to fill our identity. We are distracted, and we continue to put our focus in many, many different ways. Evagrius' great solution to this, his great remedy, I always found very frustrating. His remedy for Acadia was perseverance. And at least for me, when I hear, oh, I am burnt out, and I am emotionally disturbed, and I'm struggling with interior instability, simply saying, oh, perseverance is the answer, it seems kind of naive. But it gives you something to do. When you struggle with interior instability, a hatred for work, a hatred for one's superior, a hatred for prayer, and an over-concern for one's body, you just keep doing what you were supposed to. There's something to that. And then finally, the meditation upon the scriptures. You must meditate upon the way in which the Lord sees it and respond back to the demons with the scriptures. What I'd like to do, the last few minutes that we have, is I'd like you to take, perhaps in your tables, a few minutes and come up with the 3 areas of charity that you struggle with personally the most. Make them appropriate for discussion. Let's not go too heavy here. But what are the 3 areas that you struggle with in your ministries at home? In relating to charity, in being congruent in the ministries that we have. What are those 3 areas? And then what are 3 practical remedies, just like Evagrius had? What are 3 practical remedies that we can then implement moving forward? And I'd like to maybe spend 5 minutes on that individually, and then we'll break and we'll do 5 minutes discussing that within the tables. If you have any questions, please let me know. So again, write down or come up with 3 areas that you struggle with in your ministry in charity, those impediments to charity, and 3 remedies. Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you.
So his solution, or his remedy, as Evagrius would say, his remedy was to pray the Jesus prayer once before responding to something. Now, I will say that might get a little awkward depending on how fast you say the Jesus prayer. But there is a psychological phenomena that says we're trying to bring ourselves down from that fight or flight response. Fight or flight response just simply means anxiety. If we're in that state of fight or flight, which I think is what, when I'm crabby, I'm just ready to go home. I'm at that state of something really annoyed me.
Right.
Someone did something that annoyed me. I need to bring myself down from that fight or flight response, which it can be a subtle thing. And sometimes a moment of saying the Jesus prayer, what we call a timeout, psychologically, can be very helpful. Yes?
I think it's common gossip amongst clergy.
Yes.
Especially about other things.
Yes. But that never happens about you and I. Every week, yeah.
Not all the time. When it starts and it's coming from the source, try to shift the conversation into something that's positive for Father Christ.
Now, in marriage counseling, we say we want a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions. So, if I was in charge, if I was bishop, my wife would love that, for the record. If I was bishop, I would say, my clergy, you must say 5 positive things about one cleric before you can say 1 negative thing about them. Probably we wouldn't say too much. Other ideas? Yes, Father.
So this is actually kind of a good problem to have, but when you get multiple deacons in the same parish, and how does the newest deacon come into that family and kind of win his acceptance, his niche, where he plays, where he doesn't interfere with the older deacons, or the older deacons don't say, no, you wait your turn, you know, you're number 3, 4, 5, hopefully in line, and how would a new deacon deal with that?
Do you have a remedy?
No, that's.
Oh, right, okay.
We only have one deacon.
You only have one.
So we're not there yet.
I've actually been in that position. So we had a paradoxical position, but where I have had a deacon come, he was much older. He was ordained after me to serve in my parish, and praise God, he'll be ordained a priest next month. That sounded like I'm trying to get rid of him. No, but no. He was ordained after the fact, and I think for me, what I have tried to do is try and go out of my way to have lunch with him on a regular basis, try and go and have coffee, try and have those kind of non-liturgical interactions so that there's a relationship that's built up. So I don't feel threatened by him, because it is a serious concern. You know, that I don't feel threatened by him, and that he feels like there's a collegial atmosphere. But you know, he's being ordained a priest next month, so. Yes, another idea.
One of the challenges that I faced, and this came to me just before last Lent as I was looking at things, is I thought to myself, perhaps I'm complaining a little too much. And so I asked my wife, am I complaining? And she goes, you think? And so what I did, and I didn't realize how much I did. It was the first little things, like I left this in the car and do that. The older you get, the more you try. But what I did was, in my morning prayer, I have a consecration to my Lord and my Lady. And I asked to make the Lord more sensitive to the times throughout the day I complain. You know those brief moments before we complain that we're aware? I think those are moments of grace. Make me more aware and give me the grace to respond. In the evening, when I do my examination of conscience, I look back on the day and I give thanks and praise for the times that I've been aware of this and is able by grace to circumvent it. But for the times I failed, I ask forgiveness and strength for the next day. This means that every day I realize I complain a lot as a result of that. But this exercise is also good for other aspects because it was revealing other flaws as well. So I call it the bookends. The beginning of the day, help me. The end of the day, forgive me, give thanks and praise. And we do this again and again. And I like to think that next time I ask my wife whether I complain too much, she doesn't give me the same response.
But assuredly, she'll give you an honest response. If it's anything like my wife. I would say, and I think that's wonderful. I mean, I think sometimes I have clients come in and we start with prayer, and they want to, get right into the meat of psychotherapy, and it's like, without prayer, I am a resounding dog. And I think that's really important. One of the things that, and again, least amount of life experience here, but one of the things that I found extremely helpful in the last probably year has been being able to call another deacon outside of the parish, outside of things, to say, what is really going on here? Are my complaints valid, and are they not? And I find that my elder brother on that, my mentor, who happens to be Father Deacon Daniel, is extraordinarily helpful with those kind of things. So yes, the wife is incredibly helpful, but sometimes a fellow minister can be. Yes, Father.
One thing I would like to comment on is that we have among us today two experienced people doing psychological therapy. I think that what you do for a living we need to be plugged into that, because each of us who have had a lot of parish ministry have had to deal with what you deal with every day, but we feel at times, I know I feel at times, ill-equipped to really address some of these serious issues, and my fear is giving wrong advice that will turn them into darkness.
Absolutely. Well, what I always say to the clergy is that I am a phone call away, free of charge. MountTaborCounseling.com, you can see my name right there. I will talk about anything that you guys might be struggling with. And, wow, I just sound like a wild self-promoter here. I am. But CatholicPsyche.com is a podcast on these very issues. So that might be helpful. And then additionally, what I would say is that there are a lot of Roman psychotherapists that can be of benefit. There's a lot of them out here in the East Coast. They can be of great benefit in that regard as well. Yes.
Could you repeat the websites?
MountTaborCounseling.com. That's all spelled out because someone else bought the other domain. MountTaborCounseling.com, and then CatholicPsyche.com as well. That's the podcast. You can find that in your program. If you're interested on Evagrius, we actually did a podcast on that entirely. Wild self-promoter. Yes, Hannah.
As a physician and you as a therapist, you know that there are times you see a name on your schedule and you say, oh God, no.
Of course.
And everybody's got those people, everything you say to them, they reject, or they insult you if they reject it. And the best advice that I've had is from a priest who told me, before you go in to see them, pray grace for yourself. After you pray for them. It's tough to be angry at somebody when you're praying for them.
Yeah, well, I think it depends on the prayer that you're praying. Smite him, Lord. No, I think, but I agree wholeheartedly, Doctor, that is absolutely the case. And I'm sure that you've had that experience of saying, if this person calls one more time, I'm going to lose it. I think that is the demons. I think that is what the temptation is there. I think for me, in addition to praying for them, to pray for my own struggles with the demons in that regard, those thoughts of vainglory, those thoughts of frustration. I think, yeah, absolutely. My office, every office that we have has an icon of transfiguration and also theophany water, and we use that in liberal use.
I do a lot of sick calls.
Yeah.
And much the same situation. The only thing I would add to that is when I step in, I remind myself I'm about to see an icon of Christ.
Even in the sick, especially in the sick. And I think that really is touching. I think something to meditate upon in great detail. Father.
I can do this because I'm interested in it. I wish I had a deacon, I do not. But what are some of your comments on bettering, if possible, the relationship, if necessary, between the pastor and the deacon?
I don't know. No, I'm kidding. I think it's a great question. As a deacon, I think we have to know our limits. And I think that's really, really important. When I was first ordained, and I was starting to counsel practice, which meant I had tons of time on my hands, I was trying to do absolutely everything at the parish. And that was a huge mistake. Even though I had the time to do it, I shouldn't have been. Because not only do I get accustomed to that level of ministerial work, my pastor understandably gets used to that level. And I think to have as much open, honest conversation about the limits of the diaconate in a respectful way, I think is really important. I think priests, if I can be so bold, also have to not feel threatened by the deacon. And I think sometimes we as deacons can come off as threatening to a priest. And so I think we as deacons need to keep that in mind in great detail. They're the boss, but we also need to make sure that we're there. Keeping that in mind. I think your hand has been up for like the whole time. I'm sorry. Father.
I was just going to say, one area of struggle with charity is time. you know, we can give money, we can give our time, we can give our talents, whatever, but time is pretty big. People are demanding, and then you have your homeschool, or you know, you got things that help with the kids or your wife and stuff like that. So time is be a place that I find to be a big struggle. You know.
I think you're absolutely the case. Do you have a remedy for that?
There is a remedy, but it's not a good one. And that is that you wind up staying up a little bit later at night. Take time for yourself, you know, to check the things, to check the news that you haven't checked all day long, or to keep up with trying to put together a homily so you get to bed at 12, 1, 2 o'clock, trying to get the things done that, you know, you couldn't get done during the day.
Yeah. I am edified that you're staying up till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning writing a homily. Something that I need to certainly work on myself. If it's after 10, I get the worst. But I think the way in which I communicate that to clients on a regular basis is everything in our lives is a cost-benefit analysis. Now, we can't look at this in a Lockean way, but I do think that we have to look at our time as having cost and a benefit to that time as well. If I'm at the parish 3 hours after liturgy ends and I'm not at home, there's a cost and perhaps a benefit to it. And I think we have to kind of look at things in that regard. Please take time for yourselves. I spent years researching clerical burnout. It is one of the most serious issues we have in our church is clerical burnout. Please take time for yourselves. It's very, very necessary. But understand that there's a cost benefit to that. Just fine.
One of the things I think we have to do is learn to say no. Having been a deacon for 28 years before I was ordained to the presbyterate, I learned that the hard way, because most pastors would be nuts not to take advantage of free help. And so they will keep asking. And you figure that if I don't say yes, he's not going to like me anymore, and he's not going to give me anything to do. But we all have families. Some of our children are still younger. Some of our children are grown and gone, and it's grandchildren. But you have to learn to say no. You have to learn to say, Abuna, I would love to help you with that. But if I help you with that, then I can't help you with this. And because the only people who suffer really are you and your families. So if I had one piece of advice, and when I teach deacon candidates, I tell them, you have to learn to say no. So it's as you were saying, you have to know your limit.
You have to know your limit, and to know that Acadia can be thrust upon you by your pastor. And I think that is a temptation. Last one.
What happens, Father Deacon, when you have a pastor who won't take no for an answer?
You go and pray, and then you come back and you say, Abuna, I cannot do that. If you can't understand that if you do that, it's at the risk of your family, then there's a bigger problem.
Thank you.
I would say, tell your pastor what your talents are, what your gifts are. Say, I'm good at this, I'm not good at that. You know, to suit your God-gifted talents. And because the priests come in, they don't know you personally. You know, and you have to introduce yourself as a person, but with your talents and with your gifts.
Absolutely. And sometimes we as deacons try and take on everything, even though there might be a lay person in the congregation that would be much better suited to be doing those kinds of things than us. I am not good at developing financial issues. We have MBAs in the parish. I do not need to be at every single finance council talking about how finance works. I just don't understand it. So, I think as a final statement here, I think what we can say is that the diaconate is a great and high call. My spiritual father, when I was ordained, said, you are beginning a journey, perhaps the greatest journey of life is the journey of ministry. And I think we have to see ourselves as that. But we cannot become complacent in saying it is okay and we are fine the way we are. There is always work to be done. There's always self-improvement to be done. And we can become greater and greater tools for the Lord in his great vineyard. I think it is something that we need to be very focused on how we can develop. And I want to let you all know that I will be praying for that development in all of you. And please, please desperately pray for your younger brother, me.